I've played a lot of Smite in the past year, so I decided that it's probably time for me to review Smite, what I like about it, and what I don't. I'll draw some broad comparisons to other MOBA games, but I'm not going to do any deep comparisons there on metas and such. So let's get into it. Smite, the Battleground of the Gods, is a free-to-play third-person MOBA game, aka multiplayer online battle arena, where you play as gods in various religions or mythological pantheons, and it's playable on both PC and consoles. Like other games in the MOBA genre, the game has deep gameplay that requires a mix of strategy, knowledge, and technical skill to succeed in. There are over 100 gods in the game right now, each with their own unique abilities. They have 3 normal abilities to use, and 1 ultimate ability with a long cooldown, as well as a passive effect that isn't actively used in the same way. You can level up these abilities as you play through each match. You can buy items and relics that modify your skills, attacks, and abilities in various ways. A lot of the depth of gameplay comes from knowing and experimenting with the different movesets and abilities of the many different gods in the game, as well as knowing what items to buy, how to build in a way that fits your god and playstyle, as well as counter the enemy gods in whatever they happen to be building. There are actually a number of different game modes, which I'll talk about later, but the main game mode is Conquest, which is what people usually think of when they think of MOBA games. It's a 5v5 game mode with a 3-lane map and a jungle area in the middle, and your goal is to destroy or defeat the enemy titan on the other side. Conquest is the most popular game mode, and it's the game mode that's played at the professional level. It's also the game mode that I personally played the most because it had the richest strategy and the most gameplay depth out of all the game modes. There's a lot to learn about the different gods, the different roles, positioning, when to rotate between lanes, how to counter gods in certain matchups, and all of these just really made it an enjoyable game for me to learn and play, which is why I put so much time into it over the past year. However, the game doesn't really do a good job of actually teaching you Conquest, so if you are interested in it, I recommend checking out some basic tutorials on YouTube or online or whatever. It's really helpful to know some basics about the different roles, the different gods, how the general teamwork works in the game. Smite is a very teamwork-focused game, as all MOBA games are. Those things are pretty much a must-know before getting into it, so you really should learn that, but the game doesn't really teach you it. There's a great general Conquest guide by FineOK and the Other Frost, and Duke Sloth and Intersect are 2 of my go-to Smite YouTubers for their informational content. But, as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of different game modes in Smite, and the others are just generally more accessible than Conquest and easier to learn. While Conquest may have a relatively steep learning curve, other game modes like Arena and Joust you can pick up pretty quickly. Joust is a simpler 3v3 map, and Arena is basically a 5v5 brawl, where your goal is to kill the enemy gods and minions in a score race type system. These non-Conquest game modes are really great for just learning the game, how the gods work, or having more casual fun by messing around with different abilities or items, or if you just want a shorter commitment. Conquest games average around 25 minutes, but they can occasionally stretch up to an hour, which is obviously just a long time for one sitting in one game. These other game modes can be really fun, and they're part of what got me into the game in the first place because I was originally intimidated by Conquest, by all the mechanics involved, and I just didn't really know what I was doing. So these other game modes are a good bridge for learning the game, but they can also be fun if you just only want to play those, so you don't have to play Conquest, even though that is the main game mode in the game. And in fact, I still play these other game modes a lot when I'm looking for more variety in the game, or if I'm just not feeling Conquest at the moment. For example, I've been playing a lot of Assault recently, which is a 5v5, 1-lane game mode, but everyone gets random gods, so it has a lot of fun sort of adapting to what's there as opposed to playing a meta or whatever. They also occasionally have more random fun game modes. So for example, right now they have Corrupted Arena, where you can toss other players into these holes in the map, which is just really fun to do. Of course, there are also some ranked game modes if you want to climb that, if you're that kind of competitive player. I've started playing a little bit of ranked more recently, and it has that picks and bans type system that is common for ranked game modes, not just in MOBAs. Playing ranked has mostly just shown me that I'm not good at the game, but I've been having fun doing that as well. A couple other small things that are worth mentioning before we talk about the community problem. One, I just love the game's theme. I'm really a sucker for mythology games and that kind of stuff. That's part of the reason why I really loved Hades. So being able to play Thor versus Hercules versus Osiris versus Cthulhu is just really cool to me. And I've learned about a lot of new gods, such as the Mayan gods or gods from the Chinese pantheon that I just wasn't familiar with. Another thing to note if you do start playing Smite is you're in a separate pool of players when you first start playing. Your first few PvP games are actually against bots, even though they don't tell you. And then once you start playing actual players, you're in a separate pool of noobs until you reach a high enough account level 30. And there are some good reasons for this. Mainly they want to reduce pub stomping, they want to give new players a chance to actually learn the game before they get into it with veteran players, and they want to prevent veteran players from being matched with total noobs that might ruin their game experience. But I also know some people have been put off by this long sort of intro period, and I think it's a little longer than it needs to be, so it's just something to be aware of, but it shouldn't really turn you off of Smite if you're really interested in the game. Finally, Hi-Rez, the developers of Smite, add new gods every couple months, So it's still a very active game with balance changes and new items and gods being added to the game, all of which add more variety and replayability. Now let's talk about the Smite community, which is probably the biggest argument against playing Smite, in addition to the steep learning curve for conquest. Basically, a sizable portion of the player base is toxic. If you're doing poorly, particularly in a conquest game, especially in ranked, there's a pretty decent chance you'll get flamed, insulted, etc. And actually, people might flame you anyways, even if you're doing fine, even if you're doing everything right. And I've watched some gameplay videos of pro players who are solo queuing ranked, and they're getting flamed by their teammates for whatever reason. So even if you're doing everything amazing, you'll still get toxic players. It's really just a sizable portion of the player base is just ready to be like that, just ready to be mean, and they just can't handle the game not going perfectly. I've talked more in another video about what makes games like Smite have such toxic player bases, so if you're interested in that, I'll link that below. However, there are some ways to deal with this. Playing more casual game modes obviously reduces flaming, though it certainly does not eliminate it. You can also mute players who are being toxic, which I recommend you do, it just makes the game more enjoyable. And I also think it's important to note that it's not the whole community that's toxic. The whole community isn't like that. And there are actually a lot of friendly people out there. If you're looking to get involved in a more friendly community, I recommend checking out the Discord communities of some large Smite YouTubers, because that's a good way to find less toxic people. But there are enough toxic people there that you'll just always run into them, and they can really put a damper on the whole experiences. However, despite being one of the more toxic communities in the game itself, the subreddit for Smite is actually surprisingly good, and the developers themselves will frequently comment in these threads about player concerns, answer questions, and those kind of things. And I've absolutely loved that because they've shown that they take player considerations into account, and they've actually addressed some concerns or annoyances that I've had with the game in a really in-depth and thorough way that I found to be really satisfying. So as a whole, the sizable toxic player base in Smite's community is definitely a big drawback of the game, and it's maybe not want to play at times. But there is obviously still some good in the community, and the toxicity hasn't ruined my fun of the game, though yeah, it has put a damper on it. Now let's talk briefly about Smite versus some other MOBAs out there. I don't really play a lot of other MOBAs, so I decided to spend a little bit of time playing League of Legends for the first time ever in order to get a better feel of the most popular MOBA game out there for this video. I won't draw any deep comparisons between the two games because frankly, I'm just not qualified to do that, but I will comment on some of the larger differences between them that might be important for you to know. The most obvious and arguably most important difference between Smite and other popular MOBAs is the third-person perspective of Smite versus the top-down isometric view of games like League and Dota. This really changes a lot of how the game feels and makes the controls very different between those games. With this, there also comes a difference with how auto attacks and abilities work. So in games like League, there are a lot of abilities that will always hit targets, and ranged auto attacks also just can't miss in League. But in Smite, your auto attacks and more of your abilities can miss. So there is more skill involved in aiming and hitting those abilities and attacks, as well as skill in being able to juke or dodge these abilities. This can, as a whole, give Smite an arguably more action-oriented feel than games like League. Without saying more about meta differences, the support role in Smite is more focused on tanking and crowd control or peeling. Basically, as a support in Smite, you're setting up enemies for kills, or you're saving your teammates by getting people away from them, as opposed to healing or buffing your allies. Smite does have healers, but it doesn't really have a support healer role or enchanter type class. Healing in Smite is more of an extra perk for some characters, and because healing always scales with power or damage, healers are usually DPS healing hybrid characters as opposed to full healing characters. There are some options for healing and buffing support type characters, but a full healing enchanting type support just isn't something you'll find in the game. That's not what Smite is about. Also, I've heard Smite might be less toxic than other MOBAs, might be less toxic than League, but I guess that's all really a matter of degree at this point. It's not the best community, but maybe some out there are even worse. Finally, as I mentioned at the beginning, Smite is available on Switch, PlayStation, and Xbox, in addition to PC, with full crossplay support. So Smite is the only MOBA that you can play on console, and it's the only MOBA you can play on console and PC together in the same party in the same game. If you want a MOBA on console, or if you want that crossplay, Smite is really the only option for that. As always, I think it's important to talk at least briefly about the monetization in free-to-play games, since they do expect to make money somehow, and you don't want it to be predatory. In Smite, microtransactions are basically all cosmetics, with the exceptions of buying more gods or characters you can play as. There is a $30 god pack that unlocks every god in the game, and it also goes on sale quite frequently for as low as $10. But that being said, you can also unlock every single god in the game with in-game currency that you get by just playing the game. Additionally, you start off with 10 free gods, in addition to another few gods you can try for free each week, so you have a decent amount of characters, decent pool to play with, even when you first start playing. If you do get into Smite, I'd recommend grabbing the God Pack on sale sometime, but it's certainly not required. You don't need to do it. In terms of cosmetics, which again is the main way that Smite makes money, there's a battle pass, direct purchasing of specific skins, and these pseudo-gambling chests. The pseudo-gambling is definitely the worst form of monetization. And the way it works is you open a chest to get one of whatever number of items are in it. The reason I'm calling it pseudo-gambling is because you know the drop rates of everything, it's an even chance for all items in it, and you never get repeats. So you will eventually get whatever skin or item or whatever you want in that chest, which is not always the case with other gambling loot boxes in other games where you don't know the drop rates and you could buy thousands of chests and never get what you want. But I mean, it's still gambling. It's still trying to get you to spend more money than you need to, than you want to, and they still have way too many nice skins locked behind these chests. Though you can usually buy these skins directly for a steeper price and bypass that RNG if you want to. So as a whole, the monetization in Smite is mostly fine. There's no pay to win, and the store is basically all for cosmetics. I actually like a lot of the cosmetics in the game. They had an Avatar Battle Pass recently that I just really loved because I was watching that show again at the time. And the Battle Pass is very easy to complete compared to a lot of other games that I've played where it just takes a lot more in-game time. The only massive negative monetization is the over-reliance on these loot crates, this gambling, and obviously the downside of that is gambling microtransactions are often predatory, addicting, etc. And also, just some of the prices of the skins are arguably higher than they should be. So now for my verdict on Smite. I've been having a lot of fun playing Smite this year, and its combination of knowledge, skill, and variety have kept me playing for as long as I have, which is now over 500 hours. With a third-person view and arguably more action-oriented gameplay than some other MOBAs, Smite has really hooked me, and it's the only game in the genre that's also on console, so if you want that PC console crossplay, or if you just want to play on console at all, it's really the only option for you. But like some other MOBAs out there, a sizable portion of the community is just toxic and just generally lacks some emotional maturity, to be blunt about it. Additionally, the main game mode, Conquest, has a steep learning curve and can be unforgiving to new players, which might dissuade some people from trying it out from playing the game. Still, if you want a MOBA with a different feel, if you want a game with some deep variety, strategy that really rewards knowledge, I'd recommend checking out Smite. Starting right now or tomorrow, whenever I end up getting this video out, is going to be the Smite World Championships. So if you want to watch some pro players play at the highest level, the highest competition of the year, be sure to check that out on Twitch or YouTube or whatever. And that might also help you decide if you want to get more into the game or not. Also, a quick shout out and thank you to all my new subscribers that I've gotten in the past week. I really appreciate your support, and I've been enjoying reading all your comments with game recommendations, constructive criticism, or whatever else you guys have been saying. So thanks for watching.